Earth was broken. Cities that once pulsed with life lay in ruins, the remnants of humanity scattered and crushed beneath the weight of the Xarnian Empire. It had started as an invasion, one that the human race never thought would reach their doorsteps. But now, decades later, it was clear. The Xarnians were not here to negotiate. They were here to conquer, to wipe out everything that made Earth their home. The United Earth Coalition, formed by the last surviving nations, had done everything they could to survive. Refugees scattered across distant planets, struggling to stay alive in the shadows of the invaders. The resistance fought back, but every victory felt small, like a drop of water in an ocean of destruction. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, humanity never gave up. Not completely. Now, after years of preparation and fighting, Earth's military forces had one final plan. One last chance to strike back. The fleet was ready. A force like no other, minus 900,000 warships constructed from the wreckage of destroyed ships, repurposed technology, and salvaged military assets. The shipyards had been working around the clock, their efforts driven by a single goal: to avenge Earth, to drive the Xarnian invaders out of their home once and for all. The fleet, a powerful and terrifying sight, assembled in Earth's orbit. The warships were massive, their hulls reinforced with layers of alien and human technology. The soldiers, most of whom had never seen battle before, stood ready, their faces hard with resolve. They were the last hope for humanity. If they failed, Earth would fall forever. General Marcus Kane, the leader of the mission, stood at the command center of the flagship, the Resolute. He looked out at the fleet, his heart heavy with the weight of the mission. "This is it," he said quietly to the officers around him. "We go in, hit them hard, and bring them to their knees. No retreat, no surrender. The fate of Earth is in our hands." The room was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Each officer knew the risks. Each knew they might not return. But they also knew that if they did nothing, humanity would be lost forever. The decision had been made. There was no turning back now. One by one, the ships powered up, their engines roaring to life. The massive fleet, stretching across the sky, began its slow, methodical journey toward the unknown. The human race had sent its best and brightest, its last warriors, into the heart of the Xarnian Empire, determined to make one final stand. But as they traveled deeper into space, the reality of their situation set in. The Xarnian Empire was vast, and their forces were unmatched. Even with 900,000 ships, humanity was still outnumbered. Their enemy had technology that far surpassed anything Earth had ever known, and no one could predict the scale of the coming battle. Still, humanity pressed on. There was no other choice. As the Resolute led the fleet toward their target, the commanders and soldiers alike steeled themselves for what was to come. Earth's last hope was on its way to confront the impossible. In the silence of space, one thought lingered in their minds. This was the moment. This was their chance to avenge Earth. Would it be enough? Or would they, too, be wiped out, just as countless others had been before them? Only time would tell. As the 900,000 warships drifted further from Earth, the vast emptiness of space seemed to swallow them whole. The fleet was a force of nature, a deadly array of ships, weapons, and soldiers ready to bring the fight to the Xarnian Empire. Yet, despite their size and strength, doubt began to creep into the minds of those aboard. Commander Sarah Hayes, stationed aboard the Vanguard, glanced out the viewport, her eyes scanning the stars that stretched endlessly in front of her. She had been a soldier her entire life, but this mission felt different. The farther they went, the smaller and more vulnerable they seemed. Was this truly the right choice? Was it even possible to defeat an empire so vast, so powerful? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime. The ship's comm system buzzed to life. "Commander Hayes, General Kane would like to address the fleet. Please make your way to the command center." Sarah gave one last look at the stars before turning and making her way to the briefing room. When she arrived, she found the room filled with senior officers, all waiting for the general to speak. Kane stood at the head of the room, his stern face lit by the flickering light of the holoprojector. "Thank you all for your time," Kane began, his voice steady and calm. "I know the road ahead will be difficult. We are not only facing a military enemy, but a force that seeks to wipe us out from existence. The Xarnians have crushed every civilization they've encountered, and they've been doing so for centuries. But we are different. We are human. And today we stand united, not just to survive, but to win." The officers listened intently, their faces set in grim determination. Kane's words were like a shot of adrenaline, pushing away some of the fear that had begun to settle into their hearts. "We may be outnumbered, and their technology is beyond our wildest dreams," Kane continued, "but we have something they don't. We have the will to fight, and we have the heart to stand together, even in the face of overwhelming odds." Sarah felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. It wasn't just about the size of their fleet or the strength of their weapons. It was about the courage of the men and women aboard these ships, the willingness to face certain death for the future of humanity. It was about unity. As the meeting ended, Sarah returned to her post aboard the Vanguard. The fleet continued its journey, the distance between Earth and the Xarnian capital growing with each passing hour. But as they neared the heart of the enemy's territory, the humans realized something that made their hearts heavy. The Xarnians were waiting for them. The first signs of the enemy appeared on the sensors, faint signals that grew stronger with each moment. A sudden surge of fear ran through the fleet. The Xarnian Empire had been expecting them. They had set a trap. "We're not alone out here," Sarah muttered under her breath as the comms crackled to life again. "Brace yourselves." The fleet adjusted their formation, preparing for what was to come. Every crew member, every soldier aboard those warships understood the gravity of the situation. They had come all this way, hoping to avenge their fallen comrades, but now they were about to face the unimaginable. The fear was palpable, but so was the resolve. Earth's last hope had arrived, and it was about to face the impossible. The silence of space was shattered by the sudden, sharp blip of enemy ships appearing on the radar. The fleet had reached the outskirts of the Xarnian Empire's heart, but what awaited them wasn't a welcoming reception. It was a storm of warships, waiting in ambush. "Battle stations." General Kane's voice echoed across the fleet's comms, his tone calm but commanding. "Prepare for engagement." The crew aboard the Resolute scrambled to their positions, securing weapons and shields, as the tension in the air thickened. Sarah Hayes, aboard the Vanguard, could feel her pulse quicken. This was it, the moment they had trained for, the moment they had prepared for. Yet nothing could fully prepare anyone for what was about to happen. A burst of fire lit up the dark void as the first wave of enemy ships opened fire. The Xarnian vessels were sleek and deadly, their shapes unlike anything Earth's forces had seen before. Their weapons fired in rapid bursts, piercing the darkness with lethal precision. The battle began with brutal intensity. The Vanguard and the other ships in the fleet retaliated, unleashing their own firepower. Massive beams of energy shot across space, cutting through the void. Sarah watched as one of the Xarnian ships exploded into a fiery blaze, its hull crumpling in a flash. It was a victory, but short-lived. Another wave of enemy ships surged forward, their numbers nearly overwhelming. "Target their engines," Sarah shouted to her weapons officer. "Disable their maneuverability first." Her command was clear, and the weapons officer nodded. The crew worked swiftly, locking onto the Xarnian warships and aiming their blasts at critical systems. One by one, Xarnian ships started to falter, their movements slowing. But despite this, the fleet was being pushed back. The Xarnian ships were fast, and their firepower was unmatched. On the Resolute, General Kane paced across the command deck, observing the chaos unfold. "We've trained for this," he muttered to himself. "We've planned for this. Stay the course." The Xarnians were relentless. Their ships seemed to be everywhere, appearing from all angles, launching surprise attacks. The human fleet held strong, But the losses began to mount. Warships that had been at the front of the formation were now drifting through space, either burning with fire or torn apart by enemy blasts. Sarah gritted her teeth. We can't keep this up forever. The comms crackled, and Kane's voice came through, heavy with determination. We need to break their formation. Push forward. We've got to get to the Xarnian flagship. The fleet responded, rallying together as best they could. Each ship fought fiercely, determined to push through the unrelenting assault. Sarah gripped the armrests of her seat as the vanguard weaved through the chaos, avoiding fire while returning shots of its own. The crew was exhausted, the tension unbearable, but they pushed forward. Humanity had no other choice. The battle raged on for what felt like hours, but when the dust finally settled, the human fleet had made a critical breakthrough. The Xarnian forces had begun to retreat, their ships pulling back, leaving the human fleet with a hard-won victory, though it came at a heavy cost. Sarah exhaled in relief, but it was short-lived. In the silence that followed, she couldn't shake the feeling that this battle was just the beginning. They had won the first clash, but the real fight, the true challenge, still lay ahead. The Xarnian Empire had shown them its power. Now, it was time for humanity to prove they weren't going down without a fight. The fleet had fought hard, but the victory felt hollow. As the warships regrouped and the last of the Xarnian ships vanished into the distance, the mood across the fleet was one of uncertainty. The Xarnian forces had been fierce, but they hadn't revealed their full strength, and that worried General Kane more than anything. Inside the command center of the Resolute, Kane stood with a heavy look on his face. He stared at the holo display showing the battle damage. The numbers didn't lie. Half of the fleet was in ruins, and countless soldiers had given their lives. They'd won this fight, but the cost had been high. "Sir, we've captured a Xarnian ship," said one of the officers, breaking the silence. "We've started scanning it for intel. It's unlike anything we've seen before." Kane's eyes narrowed. He had expected something like this. The Xarnian ships were too advanced, too powerful for anything they had encountered before. He stepped forward, his voice steady. "What did we find?" "We've decoded part of the ship's data core. It's terrifying." The officer continued, his voice shaking slightly. "The Xarnians are preparing something far worse, something we can't stop." The officer activated the holo display, and a series of images and text flashed on the screen. Kane's face turned pale as the horrifying truth began to sink in. The Xarnians had been working on a weapon, a superweapon, that could end the war in a single blow. A weapon powerful enough to destroy entire fleets, entire planets, in seconds. The data was still fragmented, but one thing was clear. This weapon wasn't just another missile or bomb. It was something far beyond humanity's current understanding of warfare. "How is this possible?" Kane muttered, his mind racing. He had known the Xarnian Empire was powerful, but this was beyond anything they could have prepared for. The officer paused, looking at the general. "It's not just a weapon, sir. It's a weaponized energy source, one capable of amplifying the power of their fleet by orders of magnitude. And it's almost ready." Kane clenched his fists. He had known Earth's survival was on the line, but now it was clear. The Xarnian Empire had outplayed them. They were walking into a trap, and this was only the beginning. "Where is it?" Kane demanded. "The weapon is located at the Xarnian capital. They've already started deploying it. If we don't act soon, it could be too late." The realization hit Kane hard. Earth's fleet had come all this way, only to face an enemy that could wipe them out in the blink of an eye. The last hope for humanity was now at risk of being completely wiped out. "We're not turning back," Kane said, his voice firm. "We've come too far. We'll find a way to destroy that weapon, no matter the cost. We fight to the end." The officer nodded, but there was a look of doubt in his eyes. It wasn't just the weapon they had to worry about anymore. It was the reality of fighting a war that they couldn't win with just numbers and bravery. The truth was clear. The battle ahead would be nothing like they had ever imagined. The humans had come to avenge Earth, but now they were facing something far more dangerous, a weapon that could destroy them all in an instant. The news of the Xarnian superweapon spread quickly through the fleet, and with it came a wave of fear and uncertainty. General Kane sat in the command center of the Resolute, staring at the holo display. His fingers drummed nervously on the table. The faces of his officers were tense, each of them aware of what lay ahead. "We're running out of time," said Commander Sarah Hayes, her voice grave as she leaned over the table. "If we don't act now, the Carnians will use that weapon, and this entire fleet will be nothing but dust." "We don't even know how to destroy it," Kane replied, his voice heavy with frustration. "It's beyond anything we've ever faced. How do you fight something like that?" A moment of silence filled the room as the officers exchanged uneasy glances. The Carnian Empire had been ruthless, but this superweapon, it was a game changer. Humanity's entire existence could be wiped out with a single blow. There was no hiding from it, no running. If they were going to stop the Carnian Empire, they had to do it now. "We're not retreating," Kane said firmly, breaking the silence. His decision was final. "We've come too far to turn back now. We must go to the Xarnian capital and destroy that weapon, or Earth will be lost forever." "But sir, we don't know what we're walking into," said Colonel Ross, one of the fleet's senior officers. "We don't have the technology to fight this kind of weapon. We don't even know how it works." Kane nodded. He knew the risks. They were all facing the unknown, and the chances of success seemed slim. But there was something more important than fear now, the survival of humanity. They had to try, no matter what. "We'll find a way," Kane said, his voice steady despite the doubt creeping in. "We've always found a way. Humanity doesn't just give up. We fight. And if we fail, at least we know we gave everything for our future." The room grew quieter as the officers considered his words. They had no choice. No one was going to save them but themselves. The decision had been made. "The entire fleet is ready," Commander Hayes said after a moment. "We can begin the final push, but we need to move quickly before the weapon reaches full power." Kane looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "Let's move out. We head to the Xarnian capital. We'll hit them with everything we have. No more waiting." The orders were given. The fleet, battered and bruised from the earlier battle, began its final journey to the heart of the Xarnian Empire. Warships powered up, engines roaring as they moved forward in perfect formation. The tension was palpable, but there was also a sense of purpose. Humanity had never been in such a desperate situation, but even in the face of overwhelming odds, they were not backing down. The Xarnian superweapon was now their only concern. They didn't have the luxury of time or resources to prepare properly, but it didn't matter. They were going to fight, even if the odds were stacked against them. And in that fight, they would either win or fall, but they would never surrender. With Earth's future hanging in the balance, the fleet surged forward, ready to face the impossible. The journey to the Xarnian capital was long and tense. The fleet moved in tight formation, every warship within striking distance of the next. The crew aboard the Resolute worked tirelessly, preparing for what could be the final battle. General Kane stood at the front of the command center, eyes fixed on the holographic map of the enemy's territory. "How long until we reach the capital?" Kane asked. "About 12 hours, sir," replied Lieutenant Harris. "We'll be in range before dawn." Kane nodded but said nothing. He was lost in thought. The reality of their situation weighed on him more heavily than he'd let anyone see. The Xarnian superweapon wasn't just a powerful tool, it was an extinction-level threat. They didn't just have to stop it, they had to destroy it before it could be used. Captain Hayes, gather the senior officers. "I want a final strategy meeting," Kane said, turning to his trusted commander. "Yes, sir," Hayes replied, standing up and heading for the door. The fleet continued its silent march through the void of space, but every soul aboard knew what they were about to face. There would be no more second chances after this. Hours later, the officers were gathered in the briefing room aboard the Resolute. Kane stood before them, his voice unwavering despite the gravity of the situation. The Xarnian weapon is not like anything we've ever seen. From what we've gathered, it has the power to obliterate our fleet in a single strike. It's their final card. They'll use it, and when they do, nothing will be left of us. We can't let that happen. The room was silent. Everyone understood the stakes. The question was, how could they defeat something so powerful? "We don't even know where the weapon is exactly, do we?" asked Colonel Ross, his voice thick with doubt. "The Xarnian capital is enormous. It could be anywhere." "That's right," Kane replied. "But our intel suggests it's located deep inside their capital, beneath the surface of the planet. We need to breach their defenses, get down there, and destroy it before it activates. The clock is ticking." There was a long pause before Commander Hayes spoke up. "If we can't stop it before it fires, then there's no point in going forward. The only option is to fight through whatever defenses they have and destroy that weapon, no matter the cost." Kane's gaze was sharp, cutting through the tension in the room. "Exactly. If we don't succeed, Earth will fall, and this fleet will be the last line of defense. Our only chance is to destroy that weapon before it's too late." The officers nodded, their faces grim but determined. No one here was willing to give up, not when Earth was depending on them. The general turned to Lieutenant Harris. "Prepare a plan for a full-scale assault," Kane ordered. "We'll use the entire fleet to draw attention away from our infiltrators, while a select team goes in to destroy the superweapon." It was a dangerous plan, one that could easily lead to disaster, but it was their best shot. The team of infiltrators would have to be small, fast, stealthy, and precise. They would need to get in, disable the weapon, and get out without being detected. "Understood, sir," Harris replied, already moving to put the plan into action. As the final preparations were made, Sarah Hayes sat quietly in her chair, staring at the stars outside. The weight of what they were about to do settled over her. She had never imagined she'd be part of something this big, this desperate. But as Earth's fleet surged forward toward the Xarnian capital, she realized that sometimes, to win, humanity had to face the impossible. And if they were going to fall, they would fall fighting. There was no other option. Earth's survival depended on this moment. And it would either be the dawn of a new beginning, or the end of everything. The fleet had reached the Xarnian capital. It was a massive dark planet, covered with sprawling cities and sprawling alien technology. The sight of it made Sarah Hayes' stomach tighten. The planet was a fortress, its surface bristling with defenses that could wipe out any ship that came too close. But that was only part of the challenge. Beneath the surface, hidden in the depths of the capital, was the Xarnian superweapon. Humanity had no choice but to push forward. The plan was set. The main fleet would create a diversion, drawing the attention of the Xarnian defenders, while a small infiltration team would land on the planet's surface and infiltrate the capital. Their mission was clear: destroy the weapon before it could be used. Sarah stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, watching as the fleet prepared for their descent into the heart of the enemy's territory. Her mind raced, the weight of the mission pressing heavily on her shoulders. A part of her couldn't believe they had come this far. Earth was depending on them, and failure wasn't an option. "Commander Hayes," came Kane's voice over the comms, pulling her from her thoughts. "Are you ready?" She glanced at her officers, each one nodding in silent agreement. They knew what was at stake. They had trained for this moment, but no amount of preparation could truly prepare them for what lay ahead. "We're ready, sir," she replied, her voice steady. The main fleet began its attack, moving into position around the planet. The Xarnian defenses responded quickly, opening fire with their advanced weapons. Ships were being hit, explosions lighting up the void of space as the Resolute and the others launched their counterattacks. The chaos was immediate, the blackness of space filled with deadly beams of light, like flashes of lightning in a storm. In the midst of the battle, Sarah's team descended to the surface of the planet. Their ship cut through the atmosphere, shaking as it broke through the layers of air. The team of infiltrators, Sarah, Colonel Ross, Lieutenant Miller, and a small squad of elite soldiers, prepared for the dangerous ground mission ahead. "Stay focused," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the comms. "We can do this. We've trained for this. Just remember the plan." They touched down in a deserted area near the capital, far from the chaos of the battle overhead. The city loomed in the distance, its towering structures rising like steel giants, their purpose unclear but unmistakably menacing. The team quickly disembarked from the ship, moving swiftly and silently through the shadows of the city's outskirts. Their goal was the central command building deep within the capital, where the Xarnian superweapon was said to be housed. But getting there wouldn't be easy. The Xarnian forces were everywhere, their patrols relentless. The infiltrators moved quietly, avoiding detection at all costs, knowing that one mistake could lead to the mission's failure. "Stay low," Colonel Ross whispered, motioning for the team to take cover. "We're close." As they neared the entrance of the central command building, the tension was unbearable. The guards were near, their alien forms walking past with frightening precision. Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her focus. They couldn't afford to be discovered. If the Xarnians knew they were here, it was all over. "Almost there," Lieutenant Miller said, his voice barely audible. Suddenly, the door to the building opened, and they slipped inside, the cool air of the building greeting them. The next steps would be the most dangerous. They had to move quickly, disable the weapon, and escape before the Xarnian forces figured out what was happening. Time was running out. Earth's future depended on what happened next. The mission was growing more dangerous by the minute. Inside the heart of the Xarnian capital, Sarah Hayes and her team moved silently through the labyrinth of corridors, each step bringing them closer to their target. The air was thick with tension, and every noise seemed to echo through the vast, cold halls. They had to be quick. There was no room for mistakes. "Do you think they know we're here?" Lieutenant Miller whispered, his eyes scanning the hallway. "Not yet," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a breath. "But the longer we take, the more likely it is that they'll find us. We need to disable the weapon and get out. Fast." The team moved quickly but cautiously, each member alert and focused. They passed through a series of corridors, each more heavily guarded than the last. The Xarnian patrols were everywhere, their footsteps echoing in the distance. The risk of being discovered was growing with every step, but the team pressed on, knowing there was no turning back. "Almost there," Colonel Ross said, his voice low as he pointed ahead. "The weapon's location should be just beyond this next room." They reached a large reinforced door that led to a high-security area. A wall of Xarnian technology surrounded them, with control panels and security devices buzzing with life. The team quickly set to work, using their limited tools to disable the security systems. Sarah's heart raced as they worked. Every second felt like an eternity. Behind them, the sounds of the battle raged on, but they were too far down now to hear much more than distant explosions. The only thing that mattered was getting to the superweapon and making sure it never fired. The door slid open, revealing a massive room filled with alien machinery. In the center, hovering on a pedestal, was the Xarnian superweapon. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, an enormous core of energy, pulsing with unnatural light. Sarah felt the weight of the room's energy pressing against her chest as she stared at the weapon. It was more than just a tool of destruction. It was the heart of the Xarnian war machine. "This is it," Sarah said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "We have to destroy it. Now." Colonel Ross nodded and gave the order to the team. They moved quickly, setting up the explosives that would disable the weapon. But as they worked, a faint sound caught Sarah's attention, a clicking noise, followed by the unmistakable hum of alien technology powering up. The weapon was charging. They're activating it. Sarah shouted. We don't have much time. A sense of panic surged through the team as they rushed to finish the task. But before they could complete their work, the doors behind them burst open. A squad of Xarnian soldiers stormed into the room, their weapons raised and aimed directly at them. Get down, Colonel Ross yelled as the team dove for cover. The battle for their survival had just begun. The Xarnians fired, their energy weapons lighting up the room in bright, violent bursts. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she returned fire, her shots finding their marks. But it wasn't enough. There were too many of them, and the weapon was close to activation. We have to stop it, Sarah yelled, pushing herself to her feet. With a single motion, she grabbed one of the explosives and sprinted toward the core of the superweapon. The Xarnian soldiers fired at her, but she dodged and weaved, desperate to reach her target. She reached the weapon, heart racing, and planted the charge. The countdown began. Everyone, get out of here, Sarah screamed. The team sprinted toward the exit, dodging fire as they ran. Behind them, the weapon began to hum, its power growing louder with each passing second. They had only moments left. The countdown echoed in Sarah's mind as she and the team sprinted through the corridors, the sound of their footsteps blending with the distant roar of the battle above. The Xarnian soldiers were close behind, their weapons firing, but the team pushed forward, their hearts pounding with every step. The blast from the superweapon was moments away, and they had no time to lose. We're almost there, Colonel Ross shouted, his voice strained as he looked back. Keep moving. Sarah's mind raced as they rounded the corner, heading for the escape pod. The explosive charge they'd set had triggered the countdown, and she could feel the energy of the weapon building in the air behind them. The Xarnian soldiers were relentless, their footsteps growing louder as they closed in. She pushed harder, her legs burning with every stride. The escape pod was in sight. It sat at the end of the long, dark corridor, its hatch open and waiting. But as they neared it, Sarah's heart dropped. A group of Xarnian soldiers blocked their path, their weapons raised and ready to fire. No, she shouted, pulling her weapon free and firing as fast as she could. The shots landed with deadly precision, taking down 2 of the Xarnian soldiers in an instant. But there were too many of them. The rest began to return fire, their energy blasts narrowly missing the team as they dove for cover. Cover fire. Go! Go! Colonel Ross yelled, and the rest of the team followed suit, taking cover and returning fire in a desperate attempt to hold off the Xarnians. Sarah, we don't have much time, Miller shouted, looking over at her with wide eyes. The weapon is almost charged. We need to move. Sarah knew they couldn't keep fighting here. They had to escape. She glanced back toward the escape pod, her mind calculating the risk. With a deep breath, she made a decision. Everyone, fall back to the pod, she commanded, her voice firm. They fought their way to the pod, each step a battle. Sarah fired another round, taking down 1 more Xarnian soldier, while the rest of the team scrambled into the pod. Colonel Ross was the last to jump inside, and as soon as he did, Sarah slammed the hatch shut. Get us out of here now, she shouted to the pilot. The pod's engines roared to life, and within seconds, it shot up into the air, escaping the surface of the Xarnian planet. The team huddled together, adrenaline still pumping through their veins as they watched the surface below. The Xarnian capital, with all its power and technology, was now in chaos. The superweapon had been disabled, but they didn't know if they'd made it in time to stop it from firing. As the escape pod ascended, the team glanced back at the sky. The Xarnian ships had begun to retreat, their battle with the human fleet still ongoing above the planet. But no one could ignore the heavy silence that fell over the group. They had survived the impossible, but the battle was far from over. I think we did it, Sarah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. But just as she spoke, a sudden flash of light erupted from the Xarnian capital, visible even from the distance. The light was blinding, so intense that it pierced the darkness of space, casting a long, sharp shadow across the fleet. The shockwave of energy pulsed outward, and the human fleet braced for the impact. The team on the escape pod watched in stunned silence as the shockwave spread, and for a long, terrifying moment, it seemed like everything was over. Then, as quickly as it had started, the light faded, and the shockwave dissipated. "Did it stop?" Miller whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She stared out at the void, watching as the Tarnian capital began to crumble, its power extinguished. And then, in the distance, she saw it, the human fleet, battered but still fighting. Their fight was far from over, but the victory was undeniable. They had stopped the weapon. Against all odds, humanity had won. The escape pod rocketed through the atmosphere, the chaos of the battle still echoing in the distance. Inside, the small team of soldiers was silent, each of them staring out the windows, trying to process the events of the last few hours. The Xarnian superweapon had been destroyed, but the battle had come at a terrible cost. The fleet was still engaged in combat, but now, the weight of their victory began to settle in. Sarah Hayes was the first to speak. Her voice was soft, but it carried the strength of everything they had just been through. "We did it," she said, her eyes fixed on the stars outside. "We stopped the weapon." Colonel Ross nodded, his face lined with exhaustion. "We stopped it, but the fight isn't over yet. The Xarnian Empire is still out there, and our fleet is still in danger. We need to make sure we finish what we started." The tension in the pod was thick as they looked at each other, knowing that even though they had won this battle, there was still much to be done. But for a brief moment, Sarah allowed herself to breathe. They had faced the impossible, and they had survived. Earth's last hope was still alive, and that meant something. "How long until we reach the fleet?" Sarah asked the pilot, her voice steady but urgent. "About 15 minutes, the pilot replied, his hand steady on the controls. "We'll rendezvous with them, and then we can assess the damage." Sarah nodded, turning her attention back to the others. "We need to make sure the fleet can regroup. Once we join them, we'll need to push back the Tarnian forces. But for now, let's focus on getting back in one piece." The next few minutes passed in silence. The hum of the escape pod's engines was the only sound as they flew through space, heading back to the fleet. Sarah's mind raced. They had destroyed the superweapon, but the Xarnian Empire was still vast, and their forces were powerful. There would be more battles ahead. Yet in her heart, Sarah knew something else, something deep and unwavering. They had shown the Xarnian Empire that humanity would not bow down. They had fought back, and they had won. And now, Earth had a chance. As the escape pod neared the fleet, the vastness of space stretched before them. The human warships, though battered, were still holding their ground. The Xarnian forces, despite their technological superiority, had faltered. The shockwave from the superweapon's destruction had left them vulnerable, and humanity had seized the opportunity. The escape pod docked with the Resolute, and Sarah and her team quickly disembarked. They were met with a sea of faces, both relieved and weary. The remaining fleet members had gathered, waiting for any news, for some sign of victory. "We did it," Sarah said, her voice ringing out in the quiet room. The crew cheered, a roar of triumph that filled the ship, echoing through the halls. They had faced the impossible and emerged victorious. But even as they celebrated, Sarah knew the fight wasn't over. They had struck a blow to the Xarnian Empire, but there was still more to be done. Earth's survival depended on their unity, their strength, and their unwavering resolve. The fleet, though scared, was far from finished. They had fought for Earth, for the future of humanity, and they would continue to fight. Together, they would rebuild. Together, they would rise. And as Sarah Hayes stood among them, she felt a sense of pride, knowing that no matter what came next, humanity had proven one undeniable truth: they would never give up.